Dear learners, welcome you all to your learning platform. Now we have reached week 7. In this week we will discuss about the summary of chapter 8 from chapter 8 to chapter 15. Me, Faisal Ahmed, with you throughout this lecture. Let's begin. In the previous week we discussed from chapter 1 to chapter 7 of Silas Marner by George Eliot. In this week we will learn the summary from chapter 8 to chapter 15. Chapter 8. Godfrey returns home from the dance to find that Dancy has not yet returned. Godfrey is distracted by thoughts of Nancy Lameter and does not think very much about his brother's whereabouts. By morning, everyone is discussing the robbery, and Godfrey and other residents of the village visit Silas's cottage to gather evidence and gossip. A tinder box is found on the scene and is suspected to be somehow connected to the crime. Though a few villagers suspect that Silas is simply mad or possessed and has lied about the theft, others defend him. Some townspeople suspect that occult forces took the money and consider clues such as the tinder box useless. The tinder box reminds Mr. Snell, the tavern landlord, of a peddler who had visited Revelo a month before and had mentioned that he was carrying a tinder box. The talk among the townspeople turns to determining the peddler's appearance, recalling his evil looks, and trying to determine whether or not he wore earrings. Everyone is disappointed. However, when Silas says he remembers the peddler's visit but never invited him inside his cottage, Godfrey, remembering the peddler as a merry, grinning fellow, dismisses the stories about the peddler's suspicious character. Silas, however, wanting to identify a specific culprit, clings to the notion of the peddler's guilt. Dancy's continuing absence distracts Godfrey from this discussion, and Godfrey worries that Dancy may have run away with his horse. In an attempt to find out what has happened, Godfrey rides to the town where the hunt started and encounters Bryce, the young man who had agreed to buy Wildfire, the horse. Bryce is surprised to learn to Dancy's disappearance and tells Godfrey that Wildfire has been found dead. Seeing no alternative and hoping to free himself from Dancy's threats of blackmail, Godfrey decides to tell his father not only about the rent money but about his secret marriage as well. Godfrey steels himself for the worst, and his squire cast is prone to violent fits of anger and rash dis- rash decisions that he refuses to resign, even when his anger has passed. The next morning, Godfrey decides to confess only partly and to try to direct his father's anger toward Dancy. Chapter 9. Godfrey takes his own breakfast early and waits for his squire cast to eat and take his morning walk before speaking with him. Godfrey tells his father about Wildfire and about how he gave the rent money to Dancy. His father flies into one of his rages and asks why Godfrey stole from him and lied to him for Dancy's sake. When Godfrey is evasive, the squire comes close to guessing the truth. The squire goes on and on, blaming his current financial troubles on the overindulgence of his sons. Godfrey insists that he has always been willing to help with the management of his father's estate. But the squire changes the subject, complaining about Godfrey's waffling over whether to marry Nancy Lameter. The squire offers to propose for Godfrey, but Godfrey is again evasive and refuses the offer. Afterward, Godfrey is not sure whether to be grateful that nothing seems to have changed or uneasy that he has had to tell more half-truths. Though Godfrey worries that his father might push his hand and force him to refuse Nancy, as usual, he merely places his trust in favorable chance, hoping that some unforeseen event will rescue him from his predicament. Chapter 10. Revelo. Opinion on the robbery continues to be divided between the idea that the peddler was the thief and the theory that this is an impenetrable mystery. But while his neighbors argue, Silas is baffled and desolate. However, there is kindlier feeling toward him now, and he receives visits from well-meaning neighbors. Mr. Massey comes to advise Silas to acquire a Sunday suit and go to church. Dolly Winthrop comes on much the same mission. She is a good, wholesome woman who is always there when help is needed. And now she comes with her little son Aaron to bring Silas a gift of cakes. On the cake she has pricked the letters IHS in imitation of the church pulpit cloth. She does not know their meaning, but she feels they may have some good effect. Dolly remarks that Silas does not attend church, and he replies that he has never been to church, although he used to attend chapel. His explanation is beyond Dolly's comprehension, but she urges him at least to give up waving on Sundays. Nevertheless, Christmas Day finds Silas alone as always. While in the village, the bells ring and the church is full. After church, there are feasts and parties. These are family parties, but they look forward to the great dance at the Red House on New Year's Eve. Godfrey too looks forward to the dance as a chance to see Nancy, but he fears that Dunstan may return or that his father will bring matters to a head. Chapter 11. Nancy Lameter having made it Nancy Lameter, having made it clear to Godfrey Cass that she will not marry him, is quite pained to be met by him at the door when she comes to the Red House for the dance. When Squarkus comes out to greet Nancy's father, she escapes to the bedroom while ladies are changing into their gowns. Nancy greets her aunt, Mrs. Osgood, and is introduced to the two Miss Gunn's daughters of a wine merchant from a neighboring town. The Miss Guns, although they themselves frequent higher society, are very taken with the beauty and natural charm of Nancy Lameter. They think it a pity, however, that her hands should be coarse from housework and that her speech show traces of rustic dialect. Nancy's sister Priscilla enters as Nancy is changing. Priscilla and Nancy dress like through Nancy's insistence. Although Priscilla is plain looking and unsuited to Nancy's styles, she is resigned to spinsterhood, however, and she is cheerful about the matter. Her directness is unsettling to the Miss Guns, who are also plain but are less inclined to be told so. At dinner, Nancy is seated between Godfrey and the rector, Mr. Krakenthorpe, while Priscilla accompanies her father. The rector's remarks on Nancy's beauty are an embarrassment to Godfrey, and furthermore they provoke sallies from Squire Cass and Dr. Kimball on the same subject. Godfrey fears that this may lead to an uncomfortable end. Solomon Massey, the fiddler, soon arrives and leads the company into the parlor to open the dancing. A few of the more privileged villagers are allowed in as spectators, as the dance is led off by the squire with Mrs. Krakenthorpe and the rector with Mrs. Osgood. Godfrey soon joins in with Nancy, but they quickly leave the dance again. Although the spectators assume there are romantic reasons, the, the truth is that Nancy has torn some stitches in her dress and is in need of repairs. The two of them wait in a side parlor for Priscilla to come. Against his intentions, Godfrey is led to ask Nancy to forgive his past coldness and declares that one dance with her matters more to him than all the world. Priscilla's entrance ends the conversation. Chapter 12. While Godfrey and Nancy are dancing, Godfrey's wife Molly is walking through the snow toward Revelo, carrying her child in her arms. Her addiction to opium far more than her husband's neglect. Her addiction to opium, far more than her husband's neglect, is the cause of her present ragged appearance. Nevertheless, she intends to revenge herself on Godfrey by appearing at the dance and revealing that she is his wife. Molly started out early, but the snow has held her back, and now she becomes too tired to go on. To comfort her, she takes the last remnant of her opium, which only increases her weakness, and at last she sinks down in the snow in a stupor. The child slips down into the snow. It discovers a bright light coming across the night and toddles toward it. The light comes from the open door of the weaver's cottage, where Silas stands unconscious in one of his fits. He has been told that to watch the new year in is good luck and may bring his money back. And he has been watching out the door for some sign of the gold. When Silas recovers, he thinks for a moment that his gold has come back. For on the hearth he sees a blurred vision of a heap of coins. When he touches them, he finds there the golden hair of a sleeping child. The surprise brings him the memory of his little sister and of lantern ears. Then the child wakes. It cries because its shoes are wet, and its crying leads Silas at last to the body outside in the snow. Chapter 13. To avoid his father's pointed jokes, Godfrey is standing off from Nancy while still staying where he can watch her. He is startled by the sudden entrance of Silas Marner, carrying his own child. Silas asks for the doctor to go to the women near his cottage. At this, Godfrey feels only fair that the women may not be dead. The women ask whose the child is. Silas cannot say, but when Mrs. Kimball suggests that he leave it there, Silas refuses to part with it. Godfrey goes for Dolly Winthrop. and they follow the doctor to the stone pits. He waits until Dr. Kimball comes out with the news that the woman is dead. Then he goes in to have a last look at his wife. He feels a twinge of jealousy at the contentment the child shows in Silas' arms. When he asks if Silas will take the child to the parish to be raised, Silas answers that the child has come to him and he will keep it. Godfrey gives him money and returns home with a sense of relief. Chapter 14. Given an anonymous pauper's burial, but a death, the narrator notes, will have great consequences for the inhabitants of Revelo. The villagers are surprised by Silas's desire to keep the child, and once again they become more sympathetic toward him. Dolly is particularly helpful, offering advice, giving him clothing outgrown by her own children, and helping to bath and care for the girl. Silas is grateful but makes clear that he wishes to learn to do everything himself, so that the little girl will be attached to him from the start. Silas remains amazed by the girl's arrival and continues to think that in some way his goal has turned into the child. Dolly persuades Silas to have the child baptized. Though at first Silas does not really know what the ceremony means, Dolly tells him to come up with a name for her, and he suggests Hephzibah, the name of his mother and sisters. Dolly is skeptical, saying that it doesn't sound like a cherished name, like a Christian name, and is a little long. Silas surprises her by responding that it is in fact a name from the Bible. He adds that his little sister was called Epi for short. Epi and Silas are baptized together, and Silas finds that the child brings him closer to the other villagers. Unlike his gold, which exacerbated his isolation and did not respond to his attentions, young Epi is endlessly curious and demanding. Her desires are infectious, and as she hungrily explores the world around her, so does Silas. Whereas his goal had driven him to stay indoors and work endlessly, Epi tempts Silas away from his work to play outside. In the spring and summer, when it is sunny, Silas takes Epi to the fields of the flowers, beyond the stone pit, and sits and watches her play. Silas's growth mirrors Epi's, and he begins to explore memories and thoughts she has kept locked away for many years. By the time Epi is 3, She shows signs of mischievousness, and Dolly insists that Silas not spoil her. He should punish her either by spanking her or by putting her in the coal hole to frighten her. Shortly after this conversation, EP escapes from the cottage and goes missing for a while. Though she is soon found, despite his relief at finding her, Silas decides that he must be stern with EP. His use of the coal hole is ineffective. However, as EP takes a liking to the place. Thus, EP is reared without punishment. Silas is even reluctant to leave her with anyone else, and so takes her with him on his rounds to gather yarn. EP becomes an object of fascination and affection, and as a result, so does Silas. Instead of looking at him with repulsion, the townspeople now offer advice and encouragement. Even children who had formerly found Silas frightening take a liking to him. Silas in turn takes an active interest in the town, wanting to give EP all that is good in the village. Moreover, Silas no longer hoards his money. Since his gold was stolen, he has lost the sense of pleasure he once felt at counting and touching his savings. Now, with EP, he realizes he has found something greater than his gold. Chapter 15. So Silas Marner has forgotten the shock of his lost gold by finding EP, and he is raising her like her own child, one daughter. Chapter 15. Godfrey keeps a distance eye on EP. He gives her the occasional present, but is careful not to betray too strong an interest. He does not feel particularly guilty about failing to claim her because he is confident that she is being taken care of well. Dancy still has not returned, and Godfrey, released from his marriage and doubtful that he will even hear from his brother again, can devote himself to freely wooing Nancy. He begins to spend more time at Nancy's home, and people say that he has changed for the better. Godfrey promises himself that his daughter will always be well cared for, even though she is in the hands of the poor weavers. That's the end of part 1 from chapter 1 to chapter 15. And the next part 2 will be discussed in the next video lecture. Thank you very much for being with me.